So before we dive into that, Daniel, if you could do a quick intro on who you are, where you're from, and we can dive in.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Cheryl. Yeah, my background is definitely in the CFO space. However, I am kind of what I would call a reluctant accountant. I am a qualified CPA accountant, but it's not because I loved accountancy, that's for sure. I just love business, and I just knew that, business run on numbers. And so I really wanted to get an understanding of how business works from a numbers point of view. And what I found is that the numbers don't often lie. If anything, they can hide things if data isn't in the in your reports properly. But the numbers are the numbers, and it gives you a lot to work with to understand how things are really happening within the business. So probably my background is I started off in the tech industry, working with IT companies in fast growth companies in Melbourne. I did that for about 8 years, working my way up from, kind of a bookkeeper to kind of a strategic CFO in that period. And yeah, just high growth companies. My I guess history with these guys is that I worked for incredibly intelligent, and I'll go so far to say genius level IT people who were incredible at their creativity and design and development and new technologies and inventions and the whole lot. But they created chaos. Like in terms of what they did, they were great at what they did. Like, don't get me wrong, they're phenomenal. But they just created chaos. And every time a product was created, it was onto the new company, or new product, sorry. So it felt like very much like operating in an R&D development company and trying to find a way to keep the business operating. So in those early days, I often joke that's when I lost all my hair, because it was incredibly stressful trying to figure out, how to keep the lights on, how to pay staff, how to work out how to maintain the growth of these companies because they were growing quite quickly. So while I was doing that, I wanted to understand, obviously, the numbers side of things, but I also wanted to understand strategy because I just felt like the way that we were doing things was just too chaotic. And so I took a strong interest in learning about strategic management models and understanding how we could improve as a company to get everyone on the same page and build some momentum so that we didn't have this person doing stuff over there and that person doing stuff over there and then the owner deciding on a new idea and then just starts on that tomorrow. I wanted to bring structure and strategy and everyone on the same page. So I spent a lot of time learning how to do that with those guys, with those companies, and did that, like I said, for about 8 years. After that, I moved into consulting and coaching, and have been doing that for roughly the last maybe 6 or 7 years now, and mostly with small to medium-sized businesses. But I have clients from the local, $1 million retail store to, $100 million construction companies. So I've got a quite a broad range of clients, but the goal that I have is really two major things: is cash flow and putting businesses under management, because they tend to be the two core issues that most of my clients experience. So cash flow being obviously the one that we all deal with. But my goal is, how do we build a business model that is cash positive, so you're not having to tip money in to support growth, so it's a kind of a self-sustaining cash flow strategy. And then the second thing is, how do we get the team on board and develop leaders so that the owner can step away from the business, go on a holiday, take a sabbatical, whatever it is, and the company continue operating while the owner is away. So those are the two kind of key focuses that I have, or the key outcomes that I strive for in my role. To answer your question about the difference, the best way I can describe the difference between an accountant, a bookkeeper, and a CFO, or a strategic CFO that I am, is accountants tend to look at the past, and then they look at they're really looking at it from a compliance and tax perspective. So how do they optimize what you've done for tax? A bookkeeper is very much what's happening on the day to day. So how do we put the right numbers in the right boxes and create the right reports for today? And a strategic CFO is thinking into the future. Okay, let's, forecasting, budgeting. How do we utilize the resources that we have as best as possible? How do we develop the model in such a way that it's going to support growth into the future? So it's a very forward-thinking kind of role. The challenge is that there's a lot of accountants that call themselves strategic CFOs, but then they just provide reports on the past, and then they kind of tell you what the problems are based on the report, but they don't necessarily have the ability or capacity to understand what the reports mean for your business and help you build a strategy out of it. So while there are a lot of accountants that do call themselves CFOs, that's probably the one difference I would say from me to some of those people, is that they're providing reports, which is great information, but they're not great at interpreting it for the future. And that's what I think a good strategic CFO can look at your information, forecast into the future, and help you make strategic decisions into the future.
Yeah, you bring up some really, really good points around there, being able to go, right, well, there are definitely companies where you sort of have to look at the reports and go, we've got to fix this aspect of things. They're like, excellent, that's great, but I want to be able to be launching a new service or a new product, and I really, should I be bringing on new staff around here? And that's that's the side of strategic sort of CFO tasks that, and responsibilities you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Like a good example is, and again, this is not to knock on accountant CFOs. Like, I'm just explaining maybe the difference. But so a good example is, I had a client who was a plumber. They were doing about maybe $2 to $3 million a year, and he came to me because he goes, I get these reports on a monthly basis, and he tells me what's wrong, but he doesn't actually help me figure out how to solve the problems. Like I can tell that my cash flow is tight. Thank you. I can tell that I had a bad month. Thank you. Like, but what do I do about it? Like, what's the problem here? And whereas, so the way that I go about it is I go, okay, well, what is the problem? Like, what actually is going on in your business? And it's hard to do that if you don't know what the ideal business model is. And that's where accountants are not necessarily great at understanding business models. They're great at reporting on them, but not necessarily understanding them. So with that plumber, for example, I worked out, okay, in an ideal scenario, you should be getting this amount of gross profit as a percentage of income from your plumbers. So that's number one. If we're not hitting that target, why are we not hitting that target? We should be getting X amount of profit on our hardware or our inventory that we're selling. If not, why are we not getting that? And so I go into that to go, hey, your profit margins are down this month. What's going on? Like, is it that you've got a whole lot of staff on holidays? Is it that you've just got slow, your leads have dried up? And I'm trying to understand why is your report not matching the ideal model that we've set? Because then we can identify where we need to focus on. Because it might be, hey, we just need to put some more money into marketing, or actually, we've just got a couple of staff members who aren't performing. We have a goal of a utilization rate, in terms of how much a plumber is billable. We've got it should be around 90 to 100%, but they're sitting at 40, right? So those are the conversations that you can start to have when you understand the business model and then where you are. And then we can come up with strategies and plans to improve that. Because it might be a training issue. It might be that they're just a terrible staff member that you need to move on. Or it could just be that it's just a one-off thing. They just had a family emergency and their head's just not in it. We just need to help them through it and get them to the other side. But unless you understand the business model or ideal business model that you're trying to build, and then understand how you're performing against that business model, it's going to be hard to have a context for conversations to build, to improve and to grow.
Yeah. Are there rules of thumb for businesses, or to be able to go, well, you should be able to have at least say 60% gross margin, and then 30% this, and then 20-30% profit. Are those rules of thumb, is that a thing or not really?
Yeah, there is. Look, the reality is that the business is different from industry to industry, and there are always nuance in terms of individual businesses. I think what the best way to do it is actually to understand the business and the owner first, to understand what they expect from their business. That's probably the first thing that I go by. There are certainly rules of thumb.
Tim, Luke Doherty, LMD Property. How you going? Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad.
Oops,
Yeah.
All good. There are certainly some rules of thumb that I operate on, that I use as benchmarks, not necessarily facts. You know, they're not laws. You know, they're not saying if you're not doing this, you're doing the wrong thing. It's if you're not doing this, why are you not doing this? There's a company that I first started with, and they were comfortable with 5% net profit at the end of the year. Now they had a very high turnover, but that's certainly not, you know, my rule of thumb of kind of net profit, what you should have at the end of the year, right? I'm always going to be looking for 20 to 30% in net profit as a general rule at a minimum, right? So for them to say, oh, we're happy with 5%, then it's like going, okay, well, why are you happy with 5%? And what's really going on in your business to come to that position? And there were reasons for it. We eventually got it up to 10. So we doubled that, which is great. But just because there's a rule of thumb doesn't make it a law, but it does give us context to ask questions about why, you know, you don't do that. Some other things like labor, for example, I'm always looking for about a 3x return as a minimum on labor in most business industries in the service industry. Again, there are some industries which are much lower than that. You know, so what I mean by that is I'm looking for about a 60 to 65% return on labor services. There are industries that are lower than that. That might be at 40, for example. But I want to know why, you know, why are we got that so low, for example? You know, is there opportunity for us to increase value and increase our prices and all of that kind of stuff? And sometimes it could be that we've just got some staff that are overpaid as well. And so we have to go, okay, well, how do we navigate that, right? So there's a number of rules of thumbs that we definitely operate to, but I would say that they're not rules, they're rules of thumb to kind of bring context to strategy.
With regards to profit, right? And you've got businesses that at the very beginning they're reinvesting. And so hence you know, there's an assumption there that they're not going to have much of a profit margin, right? Is there a certain period where you go, yeah, that's all right for a short time, but by this time we really need to be looking at, you know, slowing down on the reinvestment, or really looking at why we're not hitting that 20% plus margin?
I'm probably unique in that I don't like the concept of reinvesting. And the reason that I don't like it is that I think it can sometimes be used as an excuse for poor business models. And so it's almost like, oh yeah, we're just reinvesting. It's like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Because sometimes you go in and you just realize that their business model is actually not performing, and they could be making a lot more money if we just change some things. But to say that they're reinvesting, it doesn't give the whole picture, is probably what I'm suggesting. I think most business models can do well. Now, to say, are you getting paid what you thought that you would get paid in the growth of the company? Now, obviously, you can only get paid accordingly to the value of the business or the revenue that's coming in and the profit margins. So there are limitations to that. And so there are seasons where you may be getting paid less because than what you would want, because the company hasn't grown to the level of what, you know, someone like you would be worth in a company much larger than that. So I think there's a bit of a balance in that. So if you expect to be paid as the CEO of a $500,000 business the same as someone that was running a $5 million business, then that's probably, you could say that you're reinvesting, but really you're just getting paid to the level of the company that you're in. But But my opinion is that if you are running a good business and you have a good business model, it should be self-funding. You should be paying yourself at least a industry or market rate for what you're doing, and you still should be able to be rewarded well for the size of the company that you are, while still growing as a business. So for most small businesses, I don't like the concept of reinvesting, because I think that most of them could be taking money out and putting it into their home or investment properties and getting a much, sometimes a better return than what they're doing in their business. Depending on the business, right? Like, there's obviously a lot of caveats to this. But my suggestion is, if you're using the statement "I'm reinvesting," my first question is always, what does that mean?
Yes.
Could we do both? Can we get your business fully self-sustaining and fully doing that, plus giving you an industry or market wage, rate or return on your investment? Because obviously you're spending a lot of time on this business. You want to get paid for it.
Yeah. When you're saying, I spoke to a client and they're in electrical and plumbing, and they're probably going to be making 50 million euros this year. And I asked the question, what's your profit margin? He said about 8%. I went, oh, interesting. Okay. So in that situation, and often they're going, all right, well, I need to do more marketing and all that to make sure I keep my cash flow up. Would you necessarily say, pause on marketing and let's look at what's happening inside before we open up more of the marketing floodgates? Is there a particular strategy in that regard?
I would never advise to pause marketing, because I think if something's working, my attitude is always to keep doing it. The question is always going to be around, why is your net margin? So if it's 8% net margin, now for some construction companies that's considered industry rate. So like it depends again on the business, and so that's where we would have to work on it. From a cash flow point of view, I still think there's a difference between your direct costs and your overheads. So in your direct costs, I am always of the belief that we should make that as self-funding as possible. And what I mean by that is that you can grow as big as you can get from a direct cost point of view, and always have cash flow in the business to support that growth. Now, where I look at direct costs is really around the quality of the product that you're selling, or service that you're selling, and then the overheads really is more about capacity. So what happens with some businesses is that they spend a lot of money on overheads because they want a really large capacity, but when they're actually looking at their sales are only about 30 to 40% of the potential capacity that they can actually do. So when you're at that capacity, that's when I would be going, okay, should we be looking at our overheads and going, hey, this is good for 10 years or 15 years, but maybe that's too long of a capacity horizon that we're actually looking at. Maybe we need to pare that back. So maybe we need to reduce some of our overheads to be more in line with where we're at as a business, and that will increase your profits. It will increase cash flow. And it will allow you to put money away or aside for when you need to make that growth, in the future. So, for example, a good example would be a warehouse, for example. Someone might go, I want to go buy, a new warehouse. And it's like, okay, well, what kind of size warehouse do you actually need right now? And it might be that it's a, but what happens is we can get kind of like, our eyes are too big for our mouth kind of idea. This idea, we buy too much of a warehouse, and then we're paying off this warehouse, and we've got all this capacity, but we're not utilizing it. Or when we could have built or bought a warehouse that was half the size, and that would have been fine for 5 years. And during that time, we would have made a lot of profit, we'd have made a lot of cash flow, and we would have been able to put that set aside so that in 5 years we can grow into that 10-year plan. So I guess to come back to that, your question around a client that's doing 8%, it really comes down to why is it at 8%? And for some industries, that's normal, which then we have to kind of go into a little bit more depth as to why that's normal. But in my experience, I think it's more that we don't always understand the costs that we're incurring, and how we can optimize them, and where we can maybe save some money and make some changes to do that. And that's really my job, is to ask the challenging questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And it's not to necessarily force them to change, but it is certainly to encourage the conversation as to why they're doing things a certain way.
Yeah. What have you found in your many years of working with different size, and particularly small, medium, the two or three mistakes that business owners are making in their businesses that are impacting that cash flow, profitability, growth from a financial perspective?
Okay, so probably the first one, I'll just go through and rattle off a few kind of common challenges that I experience is oftentimes a person's business has been built on what I call built on intuition. So you kind of got this gut feel of what works. Your pricing is based on your gut intuition. Your margins are set on intuition. Your cash flow management is built on intuition. And that is okay to start off with, but eventually you get to a size where you need to shift away from that intuition. You need to start, I call it the shifts from intuition into intention, because there's a lot of assumptions that you're making along that journey of intuition that are no longer relevant. They're no longer correct. And if we can fix those things, then all of a sudden it can open up a lot of more opportunity. So for example, their business model is a good example. So, for example, there are some companies that don't really know what their gross profit margins are, which if you want to manage cash flow, that's crucial. You need to, knowing your numbers is literally one of the most important things that you can do as a business owner, especially as it's growing. Understanding your conversion metrics, so things like lead to appointments, to quotes, to conversion rates. Those things are really important as well. And again, because it allows you to understand whether you're getting a return on investment when you're doing marketing, because you can know, okay, well, it's costing me $1,000 to convert a sale, for example, from a lead campaign. Now, if you're selling a $1,500 product, that's an expensive acquisition. But if you're selling a $10,000 or a $20,000 product, then that's not such a bad acquisition cost. So those things, when you start to understand and be intentional about understanding your numbers, understanding how you collect cash flow, a lot of the times, one of the easiest ways for me to fix a lot of cash flow for a lot of small tradie-based businesses is just getting them to collect a deposit to at least cover the materials or the initial job, and then getting them to get their invoices paid on completion of the job. That alone solves so many cash flow problems, because after that they're thinking, oh, doesn't everyone give 14 days? Doesn't everyone give 30 days? Now, in commercial world, sure, there are some companies that make sense, but for a lot of tradies who are maybe doing more residential based jobs or more transactional based jobs, you can absolutely get them to pay a deposit. You can absolutely get them to pay at the end of the job, at the end of the close of business, and you're in front from a cash flow point of view. So it's probably like that intuition has got you to this place, but now we need to be a bit more intentional about your business model. So where are you attracting your leads from? What are your conversion rates? What are your profit margins? What are your retention rates? How are you collecting cash? How are you managing your cash? Are you forecasting cash? And then obviously some of the fulfillment stuff like systems and processes and stuff like that. So a lot of businesses are running on intuition, not intention. That's probably the first one. Number two is they're hiring for growth rather than necessarily hiring to free up their own time. That can be a big one as well, is that you hire all these staff, but you're still running around like a headless chicken, fixing everything and fighting fires and managing people and all of this kind of stuff. So that's probably another thing that often I'm like, hey, you've hired all these people to increase your capacity, but you're now the capacity. You're now the bottleneck of the entire organization because you don't have any more capacity. So actually going, okay, well, how do we free up your time? And rather than investing in another staff member who's going to do a job, in terms of servicing your clients, it might be that the next hire is actually admin support or a management support or a finance support. I don't know whatever it is. There's some clients that I have that are still doing their own bookkeeping, and I'm like, why are you doing your own bookkeeping? Like, that's a crazy use of your time. So that's probably another one that I pick up quite a lot. And then maybe the third one is not bringing your team into the strategic process is probably the other one. And a lot of the times that's because as owners, we can feel like we've got all the information in our heads, which is true. But once we bring our team into our heads, and there are ways that we can do that, which is part of what I do with the strategic models, you actually allow for people to step up and actually understand and make decisions on your behalf because they actually understand why things were done a certain way. So those are probably the three kind of key areas that I often encounter with my clients.
I like the point about hiring for growth as opposed to hiring to replace yourself. And I've definitely done that before where I'm like, great, this person's going to bring in this much. And then I'm like, and then they're like, no, they don't perform as well. And then, but I'm still doing other things. And I've learnt that in terms of that strategic aspect of actually, who do I need? Do I need an operations person right now, or do I actually need someone that's income producing? And for a long time, I didn't really understand how to place my money or invest that, or the people I need to invest in to begin with. So you raise a really, really good point there when you're starting to grow teams. I want to give everyone a little bit of a takeaway in terms of some habits and different things they need to be doing in their businesses, small, medium, large, that you find a lot of people aren't doing and you think are great habits and just must-haves to put in place.
Yeah, okay. Look, I mean, I'm kind of coming from the virtual CFO perspective. So I think just knowing your numbers, and understanding them at a very minimum on a monthly basis. And I only say that because the amount of times that I go into a client and I go, hey, they literally only know their numbers at the end of the financial year. I'm just like, this is crazy, right? So understanding your numbers on a monthly basis is really crucial. I probably see it as there's a number of different perspectives we should be looking at. There's a daily perspective, which is really more understanding where your team is at and what your team is doing on a daily basis. On a weekly basis, we should be managing cash flow, and we should be forecasting cash flow for at least 12 weeks is usually a good baseline. And then on a monthly basis, we should be definitely checking financial reports, looking at gross profit margins, because week to week, results can change. A client of mine always calls me in school holidays because they're nervous because the sales have dried up, and I have to remind them, hey, it's school holidays. Wait till next week, you'll be super busy again. And every time it happens, and it's kind of become a bit of a joke for us. But so there can be differences from week to week, but you still have to manage the cash flow from week to week. But when we know from a monthly basis how our reports are going, and we're also then forecasting for the rest of the year, we actually can get a better understanding and have more confidence in what's going on in our business. When we have that that weekly cash flow, the monthly reporting, and then what I call the annual strategic plan that our team are on board with, it's just going to lower the anxiety when we're running businesses, because we know that there's a plan in place, we're working the plan, and when things aren't working to plan, we get on top of them quickly, because we see them quickly. Like, we're actually going, oh, that's changed, let's address it, rather than having to wait 3-4 months and then it kind of becoming a raging fire that we have to kind of put out, right? So my thinking is that if you can be on top of cash flow on a weekly basis, on your finances on a monthly basis, and your strategic plan on a quarterly basis, like checking in on the key projects that you're focusing in on, those are kind of the key things that I'm encouraging from my clients.
And say we do this monthly date with our finances, and pop it in your calendar, block out some time. What are the key things you really need to get your head around?
Yeah, so the key things that I'm looking at is there's the finance side of things, which is obviously we're looking at profit margins, and we're working out is your profit margins meeting our expectations. So we're going back to what's our ideal profit margins that we think we should be achieving, and are we achieving that? And if not, why not? That's probably one of the major things that I'm always having a conversation about every month, because things change from month to month. We lose staff members, we add staff members, there might be increases in prices, or whatever. So those things are really important for us to understand on a month-to-month basis. So we're understanding that, we're understanding how your cash flow is today, and what are some of the key things that we need to be aware of, and then forecasting cash flow. Those are the two major ones that I'm definitely interested in, is the margins and cash flow. That's probably the two, because margins feeds into cash flow. So those two kind of play hand in hand. And then the third thing I'm always interested in is how are our conversion metrics doing. So the lead, appointment, quote, sale. But what are those conversion rates like at the moment? Because if we can track that on a monthly basis, we can actually forecast better as well. That we know that on an average, we're getting 100 leads, we convert 20% of them to an actual sale. How many leads do we have in the pipeline right now? It allows us to have some confidence in that. So that's why, like, again, going back to me, I'm always probably cash flow focused, because that's, I believe, is the life cycle of the business. That's the most important thing. And then the margins are kind of what optimizes and improves cash flow. And then you can do whatever you want with that cash flow. You can take it out for yourself. You can put it into your business. You can buy other assets. You can invest in new staff, whatever it is. But that's really the focus that I have on the monthly, is really about kind of your acquisition, your gross profit margins, and whether your business model, your finances are meeting the business model that we expect, and what is our cash flow plan for the next, I do 12 months, but obviously we're focusing in on the next 3 months as a key focus as to what changes might be coming up.
Okay, so one is have a date with your finances at least on a monthly basis. Have a look at that cash flow aspect. Give us another one or two in terms of really good habits to instill.
So I guess the other thing that so when it comes to strategic planning, again, it comes down to the size of business you are. But I'm always I think you should be doing at least once a month, focusing on finance with your key finance kind of people, and one day a month focusing on key projects that are moving the needle forward. It's really easy to get distracted in business, and the other fires, or and be very reactionary. but it's often not the reactionary stuff that's actually going to move the business forward. And so when we're really intentional about focusing on the key projects that are going to move us forward, that's where I find that the majority of the momentum really comes in. And as you pick off those key projects, each one rolls with momentum into the next one, and it really kind of gathers pace quite quickly as you start to kind of tick those things off. And if you're not tracking it, it's not, or managing it, and having regular check-ins on a regular basis, they often don't get done, and then you end up kind of treading water a little bit. So I really encourage at least a monthly finance and at least a monthly strategic meeting as well.
Okay, and the third, I want to sort of drive this one a little bit in terms of habits around, if you're familiar with the barefoot investor. So one of the things was, putting your money into bucket, if you're an investor, whichever. Similarly with businesses, how do we set that sort of habit up?
Yeah, so there's a system called Profit First, which a lot of my clients use as well. Again, it is dependent on the business as to whether this is the best system. So I do use that as kind of the provisor. But I always find that I had a client who was significantly in ATO debt. It was they were in the trade industry. And it was a deep hole, let's just put it that way. And so I sat down with them, we went through their margins, we figured out a strategy to kind of get out of it. And one of the things that they did was the Profit First model. And obviously a large portion of their cash flow had to go into the tax bucket. And every time what they would do is so a Profit First model is a good strategy where you have one account that is where you collect all your revenue, and then you have about 4 or 5 other accounts that are for specific things. So you might have a profit account, a wages account, a tax account, and a cost of goods sold account, as an example. And what we would do is we would every week on the let's say it's on the Friday, or the Monday, first thing on a Monday morning, we would look at what's in the bank account, and we would distribute that income that came in from the previous week into those different buckets based on a percentage that we set. Again, going back to that ideal business model is often kind of a similar thing in that, so we're kind of putting it into the different buckets and from a cash flow point of view. And that was actually what helped them. It took them a couple of years, but it got them out of that debt now, and their tax is all paid off, and they're all on the front foot again, and they're doing really, really well, which is really cool. But that habit of doing that once a week, putting it in the different buckets, kind of just gave them that confidence that the money's there for when you need it for the different things that need to be paid.
Yeah, and I think that's because it's, as business owners, like you said, we're so focused on revenue, expenses, revenue, expenses, revenue, expenses. And the whole idea of Profit First was to be able to go, well, what you see, you don't miss type thing. If you make it a habit, then it just goes into your buckets, and it'll be there when you need it for when you have to pay your BAS, which it's so easy to pay, think that that's part of your income when it's not really. That's the GST portion of it.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes it's like you know the money's there, but you don't know what's coming up, and so you're kind of like, you're feeling anxious about, can I take this money out, can I not take this money out? And then a big bill comes in, and you're kind of thinking, should I just take it? So those buckets definitely do provide a sense of confidence that, hey, this is set aside for a specific purpose.
Yeah, fabulous. All good. I've asked lots of questions. We've got a few people here. If you have any particular questions, feel free to either pop it into the chat box on the right. It's a little quote box. Otherwise, feel free to unmute yourself. Daniel, whilst we're waiting for people to pop up with any questions, how do you what size of business owner, you mentioned sort of more medium, that you typically work with? How do they engage you, and at what point is it better for someone to bring on a full-time CFO? for example?
Yeah. Look, I think so for me, I generally don't work with businesses less than $1 million in revenue. Generally speaking, I wouldn't say that's a rule. It's just that's probably when I'm starting to see when people are needing or have capacity is probably more the answer to have a virtual CFO. I am of the belief, and again, I'm probably biased in when I say this, is that with the work that we do, there is always a return on it. So even though it can feel like it's maybe a big expense in the beginning, usually you make that back, especially if you've got a good kind of financial strategic CFO. So something for me, my kind of way of working with clients is I usually have a first 4 months kind of implementation strategy that we do, which is really about understanding a business model, doing your monthly financial reports and providing to you, going through that with you one-on-one, working with you to understand what your ideal business model is, and starting to put a bit of a strategic plan in place. I usually do that for 4 months as a commitment. Say, hey, I need you to commit to me for 4 months because that's when I know I can provide the most amount of value. And then me personally, I just go to month kind of relationship after that. And to be honest, most of the time my clients stay with me for quite a long time, as long as they're getting value. And obviously my goal is always to give, basically pay my fee back 5 to 10 times over easily. So I think that's why people stay in that relationship. But then at the same time, if that relationship, there are always times where that relationship might change. That plumbing business that I told you about before, they went from 3 to 4 million to about $10 million in revenue over the course of a couple of years. And by that time, they needed in-house support, right? And so my role is obviously virtual, so that wasn't necessarily a great fit for me. And so that was fine. The circumstances changed, and I helped for that season of their growth, and then they were able to move on to a different strategy after that. So yeah, that's kind of how I work. Is more like initially, let's get through the first 4 months. I'll provide as much value and give you as much kind of advice and support to really kind of give you a good push to start off with, and then we kind of go for month-to-month support based on what's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We've got Info Edge who's got their hands raised. Hi.
Hey, Daniel. Thank you. My name's actually Jay. I'll just the Google account I've fired up with is my business info account. So apologies for that. Thanks for that, Daniel. Yeah, lots of things that I'm thinking about here, but the main question I have, or kind of thing I was thinking about, is I'm a super small startup business in real estate, and I spend a lot on generating leads. So you might call that sales and marketing. Like, is there a rule of thumb, or what do you see small startups, spending on sales and marketing? Because that at the minute is my biggest cost, I think.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. There's obviously a lot of nuance to that to answer that question. What I would suggest, and these are the questions I would ask you normally, and if we were doing like a sit down kind of conversation of this. My question would be is have we validated the business model yet? In startups, often what can happen is that we're trying to sell something that's not quite the right fit. And so we end up spending a lot of money marketing because the product's not quite right. And so that's where I'm often interested. Okay, well, let's go dive deeper into the actual business model. So I've got a strong relationship with a marketing agency. And oftentimes that marketing agency will pass on a lead to me, and they say, hey, look, this customer is awesome, that they're great, but we just don't think that they've nailed the product, the business model yet. So because they haven't nailed the business model yet, the return on the marketing is not really meeting expectations. And so that's when I would come and have that conversation. Okay, well, explain to me what your business model actually is, and is there a way that we can be doing this, through alternative marketing strategies, referrals, other types of things? Because if you're fully reliant on sales and marketing, that can be, in my opinion, like it can be a bit of a black hole sometimes, where you just keep tipping in money and there's not real clear understanding of the results and the return that you're getting from that marketing. So I think for me, what I would be encouraging you to do is maybe look a bit more into the business model to see if that is operating and working well first, before always tipping money into the marketing. I don't know if that answered your question, so I apologize, because I'm kind of going off not a lot of information.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that in the context of, I do have a lot of conversations with startups, and they are in that position, and sometimes it's because they're unclear with their business model, and then as soon as they get clear on their business model, the marketing becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. No, that helps. I suppose I could have given you a bit more context, which I can if we have time, or if anyone else has a question or not. I don't know.
So jump in there, if I can just add to that, Daniel. With and Jay, obviously, with marketing, there's so many different things, particularly if it's a market where there's a bit of competition. I'd say if not the business model, it is probably the marketing message in terms of why you and what makes you different to the other people that I know that are out there in the market. And I think if the messaging is not clear and not strong, it's a hard decision for someone to be able to make, to go, you are the expert that I need on my court, which can then impact what that conversion is. So Jay, are you doing paid marketing, paid ads at the moment, or is it mainly organic? You're spending money on video, video.
Yeah. So I've started Google ads this year, and they're super expensive. So I do get leads, and I have converted leads, but conscious that it's super expensive, basically.
Yeah. Okay. And
is that a transactional business, or is that a recurring revenue service? Is it a physical product, or is it service based, or?
It's a property buyer's agent, so service.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And I imagine that would be challenging for you right now, specifically because of interest rates.
It's actually not. It's a mixed bag, actually. It's not as tough as. Well, people haven't reacted the way that I thought they would react.
Okay. Yeah. So with a property buyer's agent, there's probably a number of things. Is that so there's probably, if you're spending a lot on marketing, it might mean that we need to niche down a little bit more to get a clearer message, like as Cheryl had said. And it kind of depends on a number. Again, there's so many factors in this. There's no one kind of statement that I can make that is going to fix everything, because obviously there's a lot of things. But oftentimes, the challenge with a business property agent, there's a couple of things that I would just say on as a buy on the buy, is that often it's a transactional business, which means that oftentimes you might get repeat business, but it might take a couple of years to get that repeat business. So therefore, you're highly reliant on one-off transactions in that industry. So therefore, you need to find, and the people that you're trying to find are generally going to be people who are ready and prepared and want to buy a significant purchase, right? Like it's going to be quite a large purchase. So that can be, I do understand and can understand why it's hard to generate the leads on that. Where I would probably be focusing in on is how do you serve and how do you identify a community or a subset of those of people who are buying that are really interested in learning from you and getting your advice, so that when they're ready to pull the trigger with you because they've already built that trust with you. So I think it might be more of, rather than just being a Google search thing, it might be actually building a some sort of community or content where you're actually offering a lot of value, so that when people are ready, you're the one that they're most trusted to go to.
Yeah, awesome.
And Jay, what would you do you know what your conversion is for your leads, your Google ad leads?
I would it's fairly low. I would say 15-20%.
Okay, so that's probably another thing to look at as well, to be able to go, well, if I'm, what would happen if I was able to increase the conversion? Is it maybe my sales process that I need to refine? That's something that we could have a chat just separately as well, Jay, if you wanted to catch up.
Yeah.
And I can maybe sort of pick that out a little bit more with you. I'll get Jam to reach out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and that's the part, Daniel, you raised as well around that marketing piece, about the conversions, about, really diving into a bit more of that detail, because there's so many aspects in the business that we really need to understand and spend some time and really strategically picking it out, I guess.
Yeah, I think, and that's why I'm big on knowing your numbers, is because when you know your numbers, you can identify problems much easier. Like you say, like, is it the number of leads coming in? Is it the conversion rate? Is it that you're not factoring in enough margin to cover marketing? For example, because it might be that you have to have higher prices to justify the marketing that you're doing. So there's a lot of factors involved in understanding some of these problems, but it makes it a lot easier when you're really clear on your numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. All good. Oh, that's fantastic. I think we've covered quite a bit there. I appreciate it, and I really want to bring you on board, especially, we're talking about scaling and failing, and one of the parts, like for numbers, I know when I first started, I hid away from my numbers, literally head in the sand. I sort of ignored it. I just went, I think we're getting sales. I don't know. It will sort itself out, right? And it was until I got it out of the sand and looked at the numbers and looked at the scary things and put in those habits that I was able to really make decisions that were less about intuition and that were more intentional and focused on, oh, okay, actually, you know what, I've got too big of a team there, and they're not, and they're not doing this. I've got to make some tough decisions here. Or actually, this person could be doing this. So that's that strategic piece where I highly recommend, when people are getting to that point, making sure that you've got the right support to be able to help you with that. Because a lot of us are not, I would say 99% of us don't really understand what our numbers really mean, or how it's going to help us sort of move things forward as we're growing, as we're scaling. So I really appreciate you taking the time having a chat with us. Anyone wants to get in touch with Daniel, or if you know someone that could benefit from having a chat with him, we've put his email and his website in the chat. It's Peter, I was going to say Panda Partners. It's not Panda Partners. It's Peter Partners. .com. Is there an AU? No,
just .com.
.com. Yep. Awesome. Thanks so much, Daniel. I really appreciate your time, and for everyone that joined us today as well, or listening to the recording. We shall see you on our next episode of Scale or Fail. Talk to you soon. Ciao. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.